Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
And good evening, everybody. This is episode 69 in the Master of Science series, and it's about maybe 1500th show of the radio show, the science show, the radio show. Anyway, first out of the gate, it's very curious. You go to YouTube and you're looking at 3i Atlas or really any of these Johnny-come-lately wannabe so-called geophysicists, or I love these creative names they create when they really don't have anything to show. But the numbers are totally fake. And we've been tracking these. So they'll have so many 100,000 of subscribers. And then the views. And then all of a sudden they release something and there's hundreds of thousands of views. These numbers are fake. And they really are being put up there by YouTube. This is being promoted. Now, things get promoted and then things get shadow banned, like this show. As far as people with credentials in history and being there, nobody goes back as far as I do, literally. Pick your favorite talk show host, pick your favorite nose, whatever you want to pick. Pick your favorite personality, whatever. And none of them go back anywhere near. Most of them weren't even born when I was pounding the pavement, doing real work, real research, getting real data, making real analysis, and creating real theories. None of these people were even born, But the point I want to make is the fake numbers that are being promoted, especially on YouTube. The numbers aren't there. So, and then this show, is creeping along, and the whole issue is that it's being shadow banned. I'll tell you a little story. When this show began, I was with a studio in New York City, and they were promoting it. They had a promotion staff, etc. And within about a month and a half, so this would be after the July 2nd beginning show of 2024, the numbers were growing after about a month and a half, the numbers were about 250,000 and growing. It was going exponential and going in different languages, etc. And then what we call the boys, the crew, came in and just shut it down. And then, of course, I came back and opened up this webpage and this YouTube channel, and it just will not grow. That's being shadow banned. So at any rate, just to let you know, there's a lot of funny business going on. And I usually don't get involved in political issues or things of the, say, you might call the political world, but I want to tell you something that's been going on for quite a while. And it's coming out in many different ways. But people, primarily men, who are talk show hosts or personalities, let's put it that way, in the public eye, mainly podcasters or talk show hosts, either television or radio or whatever. And now, of course, they're all mixed mediums. But all of a sudden, they found themselves this beautiful companion, and in a lot of cases married them. And really what it was is literally the term for this is a honeypot operation. And we're seeing this come out where women will come from literally foreign operations and get into the inner circle of these people, primarily men, and influence them as to how they should talk on their podcast or radio show. So just keep that in mind as you see things unfolding. And I'll tell you something, over my career, the reason they don't try to influence me anymore is because they've tried every trick in the book on me. I'll tell you, every trick on the book, including money, fake money, do this and you'll get all this money. No, I haven't bought into any of it, and that's why I'm still here. I've seen a lot of people come and go, not the least of which would be people like Carl Sagan. We're starting to see people fold, like Sagan's student, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who did the second Cosmos series, if you can imagine that. Of course, Sagan did the original, and then Neil deGrasse Tyson did the next one. But he's folding like an old shoot, coming out with like 3i Atlas. Oh, could it be a spaceship? It's really not. He's trying to play the party line that it's not, the NASA party line. But he's folding. And they're in there working on him, bending his arm to say what they want. It's quite amazing to watch as these people, like Rogan, has been bought and paid for all since he had his little lawsuit. That's one of the tricks they use. They come in to a talk show personality, radio show, whatever, TV, and they're growing. They're hitting that exponential curve. All of a sudden, they're getting to the point where they're popular. Maybe they have good sponsors. They're making money, and all of a sudden they have a little legal problem. Comes out of nowhere, and they're going to have all these problems. I mean, go back to Art Bell, same thing. And they just work them over in the legal system, personal things from the government. They get government agencies or government legal staff to harass them, etc. And all of a sudden, one of two things happen. They break or they go with the flow. And I've seen people like go back to the old days. Alex Merklinger would not break, and they ruined him. They until they just drove him out of existence financially. Yeah, but like I say, they've tried everything on me. But there's, anyway, I'm not going to go in. There's a lot of other details involved in this. But the most recent thing is with YouTube falsely promoting all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, that feeds back into the promoted radio shows like Rogan. I could list off a dozen of them. And they get promoted. Anyway, enough of that. 3i Atlas update. It's approaching Jupiter. It'll be there next March. Original date of passage of Mars, or when it was going to be very close to, Jupiter, would be March 3rd, but that changed to about the 16th, and it's probably going to be later than that still. And right now you can't get good data on 3i Atlas. So you get these reports, its orbit is changing. There's a lot of pieces are flying off, coming straight at Earth. There's some absolutely bogus information. But it's going to have an encounter gravitationally with Jupiter. And I get these rather comical, these people trying to be astrophysicists, and they're not. And they're claiming there's some kind of magic circle that if it comes within that magic circle of Jupiter, then strange things will happen. And they don't understand physics, because the gravitational field of Jupiter extends to infinity. So does the sun. It's how those two interact that creates a combination force. But when it gets Jupiter, it's certainly going to be under the control of Jupiter gravitationally. So anyway, I would just don't, if you want to find out about 3i Atlas, there's just absolutely blanket misinformation out there. A lot of these YouTube channels came out of nowhere. They didn't exist, a couple, maybe even a year ago in a lot of cases, and even a couple months ago. These things just came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they're there, which tells you someone is putting a lot of information out, putting a lot of effort into misinformation, let's just put it that way. But my main prediction, when 3i Atlas gets near Jupiter, there could be some fireworks. And I can tell you for a fact that 3i Atlas, NASA has high-definition video footage in infrared and visible light, in X-rays, in ultraviolet, in radio, with its interaction with Mars. And this absolutely absurd NASA release of data a couple of weeks ago, what an embarrassment. What an embarrassment. But that was the whole point. Because the whole point of the NASA embarrassment release of 4 fuzzy photos that were months old, this amazing, they've been following it daily, and all of the top 17 teams of NASA. Oh my God, what a crock. And they show these 4 old fuzzy photos and call it an ice ball, But the whole point of that was to prop up Avi Loeb, the guy that's claiming it's a spaceship. That was the whole point. And this is part of the psyops, is to give credibility to Avi Loeb, who's saying this is a spaceship and all the aliens are going to come and they have plans to rule Earth, and etc. It's just such a information zoo out there. Okay, so anyway, my prediction, though, however, for 3i Atlas is it is going to have sulfur dioxide in its tail when it gets near Jupiter. And of course, you cannot depend on NASA releasing data. They have all this amazing, they have the Juno spacecraft around Jupiter. It's going to be, it has very good capability of taking all kinds of data. But we probably aren't going to see anything. I'll just remind you that back in the Hale-Bopp days, NASA claimed, that was Hale-Bopp. We never even took a picture of that with the Hubble Space Telescope. And then we found the contract, because the Hubble doesn't do anything without a contract. Well, we found the contract. They had millions, literally millions of photos on an ongoing basis of Hale-Bopp. And they lied about it. They're liars, cheats, and they're part of well, anyway, enough said about that. This is very interesting. Recently on my show, I've been talking about, it was like episode number 60, 62, and then number 68 last week. 62 was a couple weeks ago. I talked about the petroglyphs at Green River, Utah. One of them is on the cover of my book, Planet X, Comets and Earth Changes, and I showed some other ones in details with a lot of comet imagery. And so very definitely comets with very definitely electrical interactions, very clearly drawn, that these people observed. Now, this was drawn by primitive peoples. People that were, catching jackrabbits and frying them up on an open pit fire. It's not like they had a good understanding of physics or comets or electrical nature of the universe or anything. So I consider that very good data. So anyway, I've been showing this, and now let me go back to probably the second or third show of this Master of Science series. I did a show on the Nazca lines, one of my great discoveries, showing that the Nazca lines, the real Nazca lines, are highly connected series of radio telescopes, interferometers, and these are fractal antennas. So fractal antennas were only discovered about 20 years ago. That's the little antenna that's in your phone for sending and receiving. And the whole concept of fractals is relatively new. But here you have out in the middle of the Nazca Desert, in the Palpa Desert, north southwestern Peru, out in the Altiplano, a couple hundred miles from the ocean, you have the drawings that are huge, the size of a football field or larger, out in the desert with very meticulously moved rocks and patterns, and very clearly fractal antennas and spirals and by all different types of linear antennas, just about every type of style of antenna that you could imagine. So anyway, I did a show on that, and then I did repeated shows, and of course it's one of my discoveries. My original paper was published in July of 2015, I believe it was the date. But at any rate, right after I did that show, all of a sudden, the blanket news media coverage of so-called newly discovered Nazca lines by AI. And all they were little teeny smudges on the desert that they took these aerial photos. Real Nazca lines have the rocks moved. They're gouged out a little bit, and they have the rocks meticulously piled up on the edges of these figurines. The new AI-generated Nazca lines, or pretend Nazca lines, had no rock movement at all. They were just smudges on the desert floor. And I made the point that you could take their AI engine, which supposedly discovered these, and point it at a cloud, and you could find faces and animal shapes and fish shapes, plant shapes, whatever you wanted, in clouds. Because all you're doing is you're getting an AI engine to take a similar, say, it's a fish, or it's a plant, or it's a monkey or something, and you could find it in clouds. So there's no surprise that this AI operation found many, they said up to 300 new Nazca lines. They're not Nazca lines. But anyway, my point is that it was total, complete misinformation, and you still see this. And it was all over the place. It was in newspapers. It was in where the common man would see. And that was their response to my breaking the story that the Nazca lines were ancient designs of antennas, and they knew about fractal antennas. How many thousands of years, might have been 10,000 years ago. We don't know, because it's an area of the world that just doesn't rain. It's like the Atacama Desert. It's just dry as a bone there. And it very rarely does it even get a little bit of rain. If it has rain, it probably evaporates within 10 minutes. It doesn't really cause any erosion, so to speak. So these figurines have been there for thousands of years. Okay, bring us up to the present. I was talking about these petroglyphs and then showing photographs. Well, don't you know, this week the mainstream media picks up and they start showing these petroglyphs, but they're like a hand on a wall, an animal, a very poor representation of an animal like an elk or something, and a bunch of kind of like scribbling and things like that, and they go, oh, primitive drawings, but not a single one with a comet shape on it. Not a single one that had anything related to astronomy or the heavens. So you see what they're trying to do. They think, well, how many people will have seen this? And they certainly don't want you to know. There's a huge part of the entire 3I Atlas psyops is to keep people stupid about what's going on in outer space. It's the whole point. The whole point. And then also to bring in this new one world government based on, all the nations have to unite because we have these threats from outer space. Okay. Let's see. Here's a story that came out this week, and this will lead into my main science topic, where I'll be talking about the electrical nature of weather. Now, I have a book out. It's called Principia Meteorologia, the Physics of Sun-Earth Weather. Principia Meteorologia, the physics of sun-earth weather. And this, by the way, was published in around, I think, about 2010. So that's a good 15 years ago. But my work on this goes back literally decades. Some of it was developed in the mid-90s when I worked with Russian scientists at the University of Novosibirsk in central Russia. And these people were atmospheric scientists, and they were making measurements. They understood things from an empirical point of view, but they didn't know where the energy was coming from. They saw atmospheric lightning. They knew about lightning above the clouds. Long before NASA, they had observed tornadoes on the sun, these like tornado whirly things racing across the surface of the sun, and they had no understanding of how these things formed, let alone tornadoes. They knew these were the scientists who were boots on the ground at Tunguska. And they told me, they said there was nothing there. There was no residuals. They looked all over with instrumentation, with probes, etc., looking for what they thought would be the remnants of maybe a comet nucleus or an asteroid that may have exploded in the air, a bolide or something that created this explosion. And there was nothing there. They also knew that the explosion at Tunguska was at ground level. It was not up in the atmosphere, because right there, right next to the place where the trees were blown down, right the center circle, it's like a little lake there. The trees were blown out right there, so it could not have come from even 100 yards up in the air. It was like at ground zero. And so what it found, however, was like a swamp, a little body of water, and the electrical discharge from this passing comet was so intense that it vaporized the water, first of all, and so then it separated the oxygen from the hydrogen, and then what do you have? You have hydrogen, and it literally kicked off a nuclear explosion, 20 times the energy from the bomb that was let go on Hiroshima. That's how much energy was released in that explosion. And you cannot explain that from a bolide or a ball of ice exploding up in the air a mile or two up in the air. It just doesn't make any sense. They knew that. So at any rate, they were looking for these solutions, and then they found my work. My work was introduced to them by a businessman from Los Angeles, who was very interested in my work. And this was back in the old Hale-Bopp days. Boy, a lot of stuff was going on back then. Like I say, this was going on decades before some people were even born, the internet clowns, I call them, that are out there talking and making up terminology. They don't even know what they're doing. But the Principia Meteorologia, the physics of sun-earth weather, was a book that I wrote, and it was originally about 600 pages. And I had to reduce it down to about 300 to 400 pages. That was very difficult. And so, but it's a very good book if you want to understand what really causes the weather. That is the book that explains it. And so the reason I'm leading into this is because recently, there again, every time NASA does something, they got it backwards and inside out and crazy. But anyway, the Mars rovers, it was announced, discovered lightning on Mars. And every time one of these dust devils would come near the rover, they were able to pick up the lightning with the audio. It was audio portion of the lightning. And so they kind of like crackling noise, very definitely electrical noise. So what do the yo-yos at NASA do? They say, oh, well, this is like in the wintertime when you walk across the rug and you get an electric shock. And it's like, wait a minute. How does electricity form on the surface of Mars, and how's that related to walking across the carpet in the wintertime? They have it exactly backwards. The electricity is forming the dust devil. Where did the dust devil come from? NASA. They just magically appeared, kind of like magnetic fields. They magically are there. No understanding of the source. But the end result is they are just like cyclonic storms on Earth. They're driven by electrical currents that are discharging in the atmosphere in the vertical electric field of Earth. Okay, so at any rate, my main science topic, I'll be talking about this. And this leads into a side issue, very, very interesting. This was back, let me see, this is like the 2nd of December, so this would be about 10 days ago. I noticed that there were these straight line winds, and they were just like day and night and day and night for a number of days. And I was talking to various people around the country, different places. I'd say, how's the weather there? Oh, windy. You just got these straight line winds, day and night, day and night. So the same story keeps coming back. And I'm like, well, that's kind of unusual, that everybody, no matter where they are having these straight line winds. That's indicative of what I call the Jupiter winds. But we're not having an electrical alignment with Jupiter right now. It's going to happen in, I forget the date. I think it's just on the other side of the new year when we'll come into alignment with Jupiter. And then, by the way, that'll be a good viewing time for the comet 3I Atlas, because they'll be on the night side of Earth. Very good viewing, and NASA should have no excuse for why they don't have high-resolution photographs of the electrical activity going on with 3I Atlas, which, by the way, we could connect to. We could actually get some weather off of that, the 16th of December coming up here. Okay, so anyway, back to the story about the winds, straight line winds. And so this is around the 20th of November. And I'm going, well, I'm going to go look and see what's going on, if there's any comets in nearby or what's going on. And lo and behold, this is the first time I'd actually seen this one. We had little Mercury, which is a spark plug in the electrical nature of the universe and the solar system. Little Mercury coming around with an inferior conjunction on the 20th. We had the new moon, not quite new moon yet, which this is a very interesting configuration. I usually talk about the new moon passing, where the new moon is, you have the new moon, and then a day or two afterwards it moves out of the way, and the shock of the solar wind comes in, compresses the geomagnetic field, and creates, that's the stimulus for storm activity on Earth. It's a trigger mechanism, I call them trigger mechanisms. And then Uranus, way the heck out there, but it has a very good cross solar system discharge, where you combine that with Mercury, the new moon of Earth, and the Earth, and then Uranus, and you get this cross solar system electrical discharge. And very clearly we were involved in that for about a day and a half. And so the straight line winds, so these are like Jupiter winds, the same phenomenon. I remember back where I really first started noticing the Jupiter winds was back in the kind of the mid-90s. The U.S. military had just put up a satellite, and its job was to monitor solar wind and just this around Earth, to monitor electrical effects. And they had an electron sensor, proton sensor, things like that. And all of a sudden one day they got this blast of electrons from Jupiter, and they called me up and they said, what's going on here? We're getting this tremendous electrical current of electrons from Jupiter. And I said, yeah, we're connecting into the cross solar system electrical discharge of Jupiter. It's one of the things that I talk about in my work. And so anyway, that was the realization. That's where the Jupiter winds really got traction, is because the military, what I call military science or tier 1 science, really recognized it. And of course, this is different than NASA. What you see is NASA, a bunch of buffoon, mainly old men with skinny little ties, and they learned the standard stuff in college. They got their PhD, but they don't know anything. Absolutely nothing. They have no clue what's going on. And all they can do is repeat what they learn in a textbook. So anyway, the very interesting phenomenon back a couple weeks ago, week and a half ago, the Uranus, Mercury, Earth, new moon winds, like the Jupiter winds. Okay, so anyway, that leads also up into this entire topic of dust devils on Mars. So where do the dust devils come from? How are they related to tornadoes on the sun or tornadoes on Earth, cyclonic storms on Earth, hurricanes, typhoons, water spouts? In fact, we've seen hurricanes on Mars. And I guarantee you, when 3I Atlas came by Mars, there was some serious electrical activity. I guarantee you there was. There may have been electrical activity even to the two moons of Mars. NASA, hiding the data. What a bunch of liars. And then that woman, that's a disgusting woman. Something Fox is her last name, gets on there. Oh, all of the data is open and all of it is on our webpage. As soon as we treasure the input from everybody. Oh my God. Puke. Unreal. That's all I can say. NASA has been hiding and fudging data for decades. That's all they do. Because they can't explain it. They can't figure it out. So what are they supposed to do? Show data and go, we don't know anything. This shouldn't be happening according to our baloney theories. Okay. Back to Mars. Okay, so the dust devils, Mars' atmosphere is very similar to Earth in that it has an ionosphere. Okay, so between ground and the ionosphere, the atmosphere acts as a dielectric, and Mars has a very thin atmosphere, a very poor dielectric. And so you get these dust devils that extend up, probably a mile. Whereas you see the cyclonic storms on Earth are very close to the ground. That's because Earth has a very good dielectric and it's a very good insulator in the capacitor between ground or the oceans and the ionosphere. So anyway, the dust devils on Mars are driven by the electrical currents, and what happens is because of the electrical nature of the atmosphere, you get some ionization around the surface of Mars, and those ions then move up because of the electrical field with the electrons up in the ionosphere, the free electrons. And so the ions start moving up, and it's like water going down a drain. It starts to spin, and that's what causes the dust devils. And so, yeah, they're electrical. Duh. That's what's driving them. And isn't it amazing that NASA has it turned around backwards? What a bunch of idiots. That's all I can say. I worked around these people. That's why I stopped going to a lot of the meetings, the international meetings, because I'd go there and I was just, dealing with people who were clueless. They were stumbling around. They could hardly walk, let alone chew gum at the same time, let alone understand how the universe works. Not all of them were like that, but they were like the ones that had a brain were muzzled. They couldn't talk, or they were not allowed to talk by the older guys who didn't know anything. So the dust devils are actually created by the vertical electric field of Mars. Okay, so how is that related to tornadoes on the sun? Well, you have the same situation. You have the superatom configuration of the sun. By the way, the fusion in the sun is not in the core. It's up in the upper atmosphere, and part of the process, the fusion process, is separation of charge. That's one of the characteristics of the fusion process. And like I say, at Tunguska, what happened is this comet came by near Earth, didn't collide with Earth, didn't send any bolides into Earth. And what happened, it was, in a sense, it was kind of like fishing. Those electrical streamers are out there, and they're looking for something, and what it found was this swamp out in the middle of the Tunguska area. And it was in June, so it would have been a nice wet swamp, probably rained a day or two before. So it was full of water, and that's where the electrical discharge connected. And boom, there was probably a number of streamers back and forth. And what it did is it vaporized the water, H2O, had enough energy to separate the water, so now you have hydrogen and free oxygen. And of course, that could react, but the explosion was literally nuclear and at ground level, right there where the water was. And that's why the explosion, you can see the trees just laying out like this, a pattern in a circle, right there at ground level. And that's why you can tell, a number of reasons you can tell it was not something coming into the atmosphere like a bolide and exploding, because that would have been way up in the air and the explosion would have come down. It would not have blown the trees outwards, right at ground zero, right around the circular swamp. And also there was no residue. The Russian scientists looked for residue and they said there was nothing. No, they would have found meteoric particles or dust grains or something, and they said there was nothing because you would find it embedded in the wood. You would find all kinds of traces of mineral material that would have come from a bolide, and nothing, not anything. And it wasn't water either, because there would have been something in there besides just pure ice, like not a pure ice ball like you would make when you're a kid to throw a snowball. No, it would have been a mixture of dust and other materials. In fact, when they've discovered icy bodies in outer space, there's always a lot more solid material than there is water or carbon dioxide ice. Okay. So at any rate, the Russian scientists were very, very aware that there were electrical phenomena going on in the atmosphere, but they didn't know where the energy source came from. And interestingly enough, if you go back to Tesla, he didn't know where the energy source was either. He was familiar with the vertical electric field. You could measure it. It's pretty high. It's about 300 volts per meter. But he didn't understand, well, why didn't it discharge? Well, he understood that the Earth had a very good dielectric in the atmosphere. He understood that. But he had his experiments, his Wardenclyffe experiment, and he had his Colorado Springs experiments where he was tapping into the vertical electric field. But he didn't know where the energy came from. He didn't know how high up the other end of the capacitor was. He had no inkling of the extent of our atmosphere. He didn't know that there was a ionosphere above that. He didn't know that there were jet streams that were powered by, coupled with the magnetic field. He did not know that there were Van Allen belts. He didn't know that there was an external plasma magnetic field that surrounds Earth. He didn't know about the solar wind. Just think of all the things that Tesla didn't know, including Einstein. Tesla died in what, 44? Einstein died in 54, something like that. They had no clue about any of these things. And the Russian scientists had measured all kinds of things. They had measured all kinds of things around Jupiter, but did not understand. They were very privy to the Schumacher-Levy 9, the 21 pieces of this comet that came into Jupiter and that exploded above the atmosphere. It wasn't when they touched the atmosphere. It was before, and they could measure the electrical discharges and the explosions, where the explosions were so intense that the X-rays, because this was on the far side of Jupiter from Earth's perspective, the explosions created X-rays that bounced off, there was a reflection, off the moons of Jupiter, which were on the far side of Jupiter, and you could measure the reflection on Earth, so they literally could tell how much energy was being expended in these explosions of 21 pieces. And any one of those explosions would have been more than all the nuclear bombs on Earth put together of all the countries, and that's a lot. That's a boatload of energy being expended as these comets come in, and they had all turned into sulfur dioxide comets. And they made a public statement. They said, McCanney's comet model is correct. That's why it's so bizarre to see Avi Loeb and NASA and literally all the YouTube channels following this dirty snowball comet model. It just couldn't even possibly be true. Yet, but that shows you also the level of control in everything that's being put out. Huge level of control. Okay, so let me go into the physics of weather. Let me tell you all of the things that we would not have if it were not for electricity in the atmosphere. We would not have snow. Snow requires the artificial snow that they make in the laboratory is based on a pinhead that has an electrical charge on it. And they set it up to a voltage, and then that's equivalent to the little piece of dust. Every snowflake at the core, at the beginning, has what we call a seed or piece of dust. And that's what the snowflake grows on. But that little seed, that little piece of dust that might be from a dust storm in China or something, is discharging the local electric field in the cloud where the snow is forming, and that attracts the water, the H2O molecules, to come in, just like a comet tail, H2O, water, coming into the nucleus, and that's where, because of the voltage, this maintained the same mechanism that maintains a negative voltage on a comet nucleus, is the same one that works for creating snowflakes. So we wouldn't have snow if it were not for the vertical electric field. They just don't, crystals of water just don't grow on just because there's a little piece of dust there. They need that vertical electric field. Okay, so I'm going to go through a number of weather phenomena here and relate them to this same issue. The inciting of storms because of a solar storm. How does that happen? Okay, so the sun kicks out a pulse of protons, basically what we call a solar storm or a magnetic storm from the sun, because that current of protons also carries a magnetic field with it. And so what happens? The protons hit the outer magnetic field of Earth, which compresses it. Okay, so you have these layers, 5 layers of magnetic field that are literally electrical currents. And by the way, this idea that magma flows in the center of the Earth and somehow creates Earth's magnetic field is just absolutely absurd. We have what we call ring currents that are up in the ionosphere. And if you're on the ground with like a Boy Scout compass or a Girl Scout compass, they are sensing the magnetic field that's in the crust mantle of the Earth, and this is mainly due to nickel and iron. So the nickel and iron have a magnetic field, which is interesting in itself. The Earth has a magnetic field, and that's what you're sensing. But if there's a day when you have a magnetic storm, you can see that needle moving because that's controlled by the plasma magnetic field. But it's very interesting, the Earth's permanent magnetic field. Here's how you make a permanent magnet. You take iron or nickel is not as good a permeability as iron. But you take the iron, you melt it, and past what is known as the Curie temperature. The Curie temperature is the temperature at which the individual atoms lock together and they won't move anymore. Okay, and that's the state of the magnetic field in the Earth's surface that you measure with a compass. And by the way, this is different. I get a kick out of these people that are using their phone as a compass. That's using GPS. That's not a magnetic field compass. I saw a joker. He was at some Indian religious shrine, and he was going, look at, they have the exact north reading here, and it was true north and south, not magnetic north. And he was thinking that his phone was giving him a magnetic north reading. You know, some people just don't have a clue what's going on in the real world. But anyway, this is the interesting thing about the Earth's permanent magnetic field. To create a magnetic field that's permanent, You have nickel or iron; those are the primary ones, and there's all kinds of modern materials that give you a stronger magnetic field that are used like in wind turbines, etc. Now, the way you melt the iron, and every little iron atom has an inherent magnetic field. And so what happens is in a molten state, these are moving around in all different directions, so there's no permanent magnetic field. But now if you take an external magnetic field, say from a current loop or something like that, and you then allow the iron to cool past the Curie temperature, where the material solidifies those atoms in place, now you've aligned them with an external magnetic field. And then they cool through the Curie temperature, and that gives you, if you have a much more powerful magnetic field, then the alignment of the little iron atoms would be more precise and all in the same direction, and you would get a stronger permanent magnet. But you need an external magnetic field that is constant. Now imagine the Earth cooling down over millions of years, or who knows, hundreds of millions of years, as this iron and nickel in the Earth's mantle and crust solidify past the Curie temperature. That's going to take a very long time. That means that Earth had to have had a permanent magnet from someplace for this entire period of cooling, so that the magnetic field would then be locked into the iron and nickel materials. So where did that come from? What had to have been a plasma magnetic field, and that would have been due to the solar plasma magnetic field that we're dealing with all the time. These would have been plasma magnetic fields that surrounded Earth at the time when these materials were cooling in the Earth's surface, iron and nickel. And that had to have been for a period of millions of years. And so you can tell right there that Earth's magnetic field, the permanent magnetic field, wouldn't even be here if we did not have a plasma magnetic field. It wouldn't even be here. How would you get all these materials to solidify with an internal magnetic field if there was not some present external magnetic field to hold it there, those atoms in place, as they cured over millions of years, as they passed through the Curie temperature? Okay, so that's a little bit of a concept that's important to understand. Okay, but the whole issue of the Earth is there is a 5-layer magnetic field. We have the permanent magnet. Like I said, the idea that there is moving magma in the Earth's surface that somehow creates a magnetic field is just ridiculous, because down deep in the Earth, nothing's moving. There's no movement of any kind. The pressure is too great. Something can't move over there without something else moving over here. It's like, okay, take a river. Take a river that's flowing. The river's ability to keep moving depends on the water downstream to be moving out of the way, so that it's moving out of the way. If it didn't do that, if you put a dam there, then the water cannot move. And so that's the situation internal in the Earth. For something to move, something else has to move first, and it's just not going to happen. So anyway, let me get back to electricity and the magnetism in the Earth's atmosphere. Just quickly, the tornadoes on the sun are due to the local electrical fields, non-uniform electric fields that surround the sun, and that's because of the fusion fire up in the upper atmosphere of the sun. The solar corona is a sea of relativistic electrons, and so that creates that differential electrical field to drive the tornadoes on the sun. And it's the same process. As the ion current sheets move up, they're going to spin. That's due to the Coriolis force, and creates the tornadoes on the sun. And like I say, the Russians observed these in the mid-1990s, they were asking me, how do these things form? What's going on? And it's comical because NASA didn't even know about it until 2005, 2006. And then they make this big announcement, oh, we're seeing tornadoes on the sun. A bunch of idiots. I mean, they are so out of it. They live in their little corner, their little ivory cubicle. It's not even a tower. It's an ivory cubicle. And so anyway, let's get back to some cyclonic storms. Okay, let's name them off. Hurricanes, typhoons, which is the Pacific name for the hurricane, tornadoes. Now, on the leading edge of a hurricane, you have a lot of tornadoes, and especially when it makes landfall, a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of the damage, a lot of the wind damage that occurs by hurricanes is not from the wind around the eye of the hurricane. It's the winds due to the tornadoes that are on the leading edge of the hurricane as it makes landfall. And then, of course, at that point, too, it's shorting out to land and it's dumping a lot of its water. And that's how, by the way, I invented a couple ways to mitigate hurricanes. And one was to short the storm out over the continental shelf. Most islands in the Caribbean, for example, and for sure the entire Gulf Coast and eastern coast of the United States has a shelf, continental shelf. And so you put the buoys, the shorting buoys out there, and you literally short-circuit the storm offshore. So you drain of its electrical energy, and you drain it of its water offshore. And those are the two main causes of damage from a hurricane. So you can mitigate the damage of a hurricane by that method. And then also with the Russians, we invented the mechanism for using laser satellites to control hurricanes, because the driving force is the electrical current. And so within a laser satellite, you can direct the discharge and you can actually move the storm around like a bull with a ring in its nose. And that's what the U.S. military took and weaponized back in the early 2000s. That's why Katrina, that's why a lot of these storms are manipulated, because of the basically the U.S. military taking a technology that was designed for peaceful purposes and turning it into a military weapon against its own population. Okay, so let me talk about Jupiter and Saturn here before this show ends. Jupiter has the Great Red Spot. It's a cyclonic storm. It's like a hurricane that just gets going and going and going. Why do hurricanes stop on Earth, or typhoons? Because they make landfall. Is it because they're running into big mountains? No. It's because they literally short out. They electrically short out to land. And I talk about this. I can not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I talk about this entire process in my weather book, the Principia Meteorologia, the Physics of Sun-Earth Weather. I talk about this entire process of shorting out a storm. However, with Jupiter's Great Red Spot does not have a continent to short out. So it just keeps going and going and going, like the ever-ready bunny. Same way with Saturn. You can see, if you look down in various wavelengths, you can see down into the atmosphere of Saturn, and you can see the cyclonic storms in the atmosphere, that six-sided hexagonal pattern at the south pole of Saturn. When that first came out, I said, yeah, you see that on Earth all the time. Go down to the maps, the school maps, wind chart, you can find it on the internet. Just search for school, that's literally the word school, maps and wind, and it'll come up, probably the first thing. And you can rotate the Earth, but go down to the South Pole and just watch the wind patterns. And every now and then you will get a wind pattern. It's 6 storms around a central storm, all about the same size. And sometimes you get storms, one of them bigger than the other one. But typically there's 5 or 6 storms always circling. They're kind of like orbiting the central storm that's at the South Pole, and these are all driven by electrical currents. Okay, so Jupiter and Saturn, the cyclonic activity in their atmospheres, is due to the discharge of the vertical electric field in their atmosphere. So it's the same process that creates tornadoes on the sun, the same process that creates the dust devils on Mars, which NASA thinks is caused by people walking across the carpeting and shocking in the wintertime. You know, they have no clue that these are all the same phenomena. And then, by the way, they are all driven ultimately by the sun. The sun's electric field, each planet is discharging the electric field, and that causes charging, and you get this charging, the surface charging on the upper ionosphere, and that's why all the planets have surface charging. Jupiter and Saturn have fusion in their own atmospheres, and that's due to electrical discharges actually measured directly by the Voyager spacecraft. So at any rate, let me see. Water spouts are included in this list. Let me talk a little bit about lightning. Now, the standard story for lightning, they say that, the tumultuous updraft currents within the cloud separate charge, and this causes electrical charging, and the lightning comes shooting out the bottom. Well, that story, might convince a third grader, 50 years ago in a textbook. It sounds reasonable. But no, if you have a battery that's generated internally, like a car battery or a little AA or AAA battery that you put in a flashlight or your radio or whatever, the energy is formed internally, and unless you put a circuit, some kind of a short circuit with less impedance between the poles, it's not going to discharge between the poles. It's going to discharge internally. In fact, that's one of the issues with, say, a car battery. If you leave your car battery too long, it's going to discharge internally, not externally, internally. That's because it does not have an infinite impedance inside the battery. And it's just going to slowly decay until there's nothing left. Until there's no charge left on the battery. But the thing that keeps the solar system charged is the constant charging of the solar capacitor with the excess current of protons in the solar wind. And how does that occur? Because the sun doesn't have enough atmosphere to keep doing this forever, or for very long at all. And the whole situation is that the sun is constantly taking on hydrogen. And once the fire starts, then it's just going to keep going. And the influx of hydrogen is what keeps this thing burning for millions and millions of years, which means it's variable. So all of the climate change aficionados out there that like to repeat emotional science, the assumption is that the sun is stable over long periods of time, and it's just not. The Russians were very keen on this. They had already identified that the sun energy was related to hydrogen in the local galactic environment. They already knew that. Alexei Dmitriev had papers published on that exact topic, but they didn't know where it came from, and they didn't know how it got into the sun. Well, the sun is acting like a comet, and it's pulling in hydrogen, just like a comet is pulling in hydrogen, the same electrical discharge. So the sun is discharging the galactic electric field, just like a comet is discharging the solar magnetic field, using the same fusion process to separate charge. Just as simple as that, very simple. The universe is a extremely simple place. Okay, well, I could go on, but I encourage you to pick up my book and the Principia Meteorologia, the physics of sun, earth, weather, It's on Amazon, by the way, in print form. Go to my library. Just search my name, McCanny, and make sure you spell it right. It's, let's see, right up here. McCanny, McCanney, on Amazon, and you can get I think there's 5 of my books now in print form on Amazon or on my webpage. Go to the jmccsci.com webpage and get the books, etc. And I just want to end by saying that my sale pricing for the water filters has ended, but I'm keeping for a period of time the sale on the gravity water filter, the replacement filter elements. And the pricing I talked about, $199 for 4, $378 for an 8-pack. We send you 10, and $100 off for the 12-pack. $497 for a 12-pack. We send you 14. So go to the webpage, jmccsci.com, or directly to the water filter webpage, jmccwaterfilters.com. And also, we have the whole house, MR5 whole house water filter, what I call the best deal. It comes with a UV sterilizer, and install that in your house, and you have clean water for hot and cold water, much better system, and per gallon a far more economical system than gravity. But it seems that most people still have the gravity filters. And so go there and jmccwaterfilters.com and get your own source of clean water. By the way, it pays for itself just by taking your water with you instead of buying bottled water, which is horrifically bad. The chemicals that are in that thin plastic water bottle are terrible for you. The cancer-causing chemicals in that plastic bottle that get into the water, and you're drinking it. So take your water bottle from home, get a nice aluminum or stainless steel water bottle, and take it with you. Fill it up at home and save a lot of money and be a lot healthier. Once again, thank you, and I'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanny. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,